Hi everyone, Armored Pants here, and I have another tutorial for you. This is how to do big damage. This is a subscriber request video. So one of my subscribers, obviously an awesome guy who I think recently won the Nobel Prize for subscription, asked for this. So I had a long think about it because seems like an easy topic, but it's not that easy to broach. So I thought, I'll try to take an unusual approach or a different approach to it. So what are we looking at here? We're looking at Conor McGregor knocking out Jose Aldo in 13 seconds. I think it was 10. The countdown was after 3 seconds. By the way, I should probably preface this by saying that even though I'm Irish and I've done MMA for the last 15 years, I am not a big fan of either the sport or Conor McGregor. Mainly because I think Conor has let down. He could have been potentially a great representative of his sport and of Ireland, but I think he's let people down a bit recently. But I do digress. Why is this important? Well, obviously it's big damage, right? So he knocked out an undefeated reigning champion of 10 years in 10 seconds, right? How did he do it? Well, it was about preparation, right? It was about knowing his strengths, about knowing the weaknesses of his enemy, his opponent. And in actuality, if you listen to his analysis afterwards, he basically planned it so that it would unfold that way, and that Aldo walked into his strongest weapon, which was his left hand punch. And that's what ended the fight, right? And what parallels do we draw from this in Blitz? Well, if you want to do big damage, right? If you want your opponents to end up looking like this, it is about preparation, right? It's about preparation and it's about knowledge of the game. Another thing I would say is, and maybe I'm going back into my real job here, and I'm going to talk a bit about business, right? Very often when I speak to boards or shareholders, they say things to me like, well, our objective, our strategy is to generate significant revenues or capture market share, and that's our strategy, right? That's not a strategy, right? That is the outcome of a strategy. And doing big damage in Blitz is not a strategy, right? Doing big damage, the components that go into it, is not a strategy in itself. It is the outcome of a strategy. It is the outcome of knowing how to play the game well. It is the outcome of understanding what you should be doing in the game. And if you do that and execute it properly, then big damage is a result of that. It is not a strategy or an objective in itself. Now, first point I'd say is that it's relevant, it's not absolute, so therefore it depends on the tier you're playing in, right? Obviously in a lower tier you can do huge damage, but it's going to be less in a top tier, right? So I thought a first thing to discuss, take it back to basics, is what do we mean by big damage? I always find when I'm trying to tackle a problem, whether in life or business or here in Blitz, it's better to have an understanding of what you're trying to achieve, what the problem is, break it into simple components, and therefore you have a better chance of tackling that problem, right? So what I've done is I've actually taken tiers 4 to 10, because I think that's probably where it's most relevant that we look at this, and I've taken the average hit point per tier, approximate, obviously, generate the average total hit point pool of the team for that tier, so multiply the average by 7, and then use a percentage of that to create a benchmark of what we think is big damage. So I've decided to use 25%. So I think that there's seven players on each team. I think if you do a quarter of the damage, I think that is a nice benchmark. I think that's acceptable. Above a quarter damage means you've done big damage, right? You may disagree. You may say it's higher. You want it to be 35% or whatever. It doesn't really matter. I mean, that's what you get the badge for, right? In high caliber in Blitz, right? But I think that it is 25%. I think is a fair target. So if we look at it here in the table and now in the graph, tier 4 it's 700 and above, at tier 7 it's 1750 and above, and then at tier 9 it's almost 3000 and above, and at tier 10 3,500 and above. I think if you do 3,500 damage in tier 10, you can say you've done big damage, right? But this is, by the way, is the control, right? So what we're saying is it's above this, right? Okay. Now you may feel free to disagree, or you could use a different percentage. It doesn't really matter, as long as we set ourselves a goal, right? And I'm going to give you a task later on, by the way, and we'll use this as a goal to benchmark ourselves. Now, another thing which is very important is your tank type, the type of tank you're playing, right? So you can play lights, you can play meds, you can play heavies, or you can play tank destroyers. And understanding the role of those tanks is key, because if you're in a light tank or a medium tank, you know, you're not necessarily going to do big damage, and that's not necessarily your role either. Of course you can do big damage in those types of tanks, but it's not really your role. You look at really heavy tanks, but especially tank destroyers, to do your heavy damage, right? Each tank has a role in the game. You know, for example, a light tank is to spot, it's to scout, it's to be the eyes of the team. So therefore, you know, if you want to do big damage, you need to think about the type of tank you're playing. And if you really want to do big damage, you think about playing heavy or think about playing tank destroyers. If you pick either of those, I think then you also need to know how to set up your tank. You need to understand a lot of the key dynamics, the mathematical parameters around the game. So we're going to have a look at the waffle tractor here and how it should be set up if you want to maximize damage, in my opinion, of course. So basically you're going to run chocolate bar and improved fuel. That maximizes your view range, maximizes your damage per minute, maximizes your reload, and basically allows you to be much more effective in terms of utilizing the gun system. We're going to have a look at the equipment setup now in a second too. Now, I also spoke about preparation, and you know, there are a few videos in the Advanced Blitz tutorial section of this channel that I think you need to look at. They are preparation, they are about gun handling, about maneuverability, and then about the different roles and types of tanks, and then also about sniping. And there's some key stuff in there about deflection shooting, about dispersion, about muzzle velocity and how it impacts your ability to penetrate, etc. And you need to understand all of those things. I'm not going to go into those details here now, but I think that you need to understand those. So therefore I'm going to put links for those into the description, and I would ask you to have a look at those if you haven't watched them already, because it's all about preparation, understanding your tank and understanding those dynamics. If you want to penetrate and hit more, I would recommend you use Supercharge and Refined Gun, because Supercharge increases muzzle velocity and Refined Gun reduces dispersion. Muzzle velocity has a direct impact on your ability to penetrate, and Refined Gun basically reduces dispersion, which is basically your maximum deviation from what you aim at. So the higher the dispersion, the more likely you are to miss. So reducing dispersion means you're less likely to miss. Now, the alternative to Refined Gun is Vertical Stabilizer. Vertical Stabilizer only works when you fire when you're moving. If you're in a TD, you should not be moving that much. Of course you will, but the majority of the time you're still when you fire, so therefore use Refined Gun. It's basic understanding of the game and will help you to do big damage. The other thing is making sure your shots penetrate and that you're doing damage regularly. This helps you to maximize your rolls. It helps you to get your max roll every third shot. It also means that you are not missing out on shots. So therefore you have a higher actual DPM as opposed to theoretical DPM. All these things are important. When playing a tank that should be doing damage like a heavy or a TD, you also need patience, you need map awareness, and you need to be careful in your shot selection. And another key point is you need to understand your shell type and to rotate through those shells according to the shot you want to make. Perfect example coming up here. I will not pen with AP, rotate through to HE, bam, over 400 hit points dealt. Now there are no other shots on, so therefore that is an extra 400 and whatever it was, 50 odd hit points that I've been able to claim to my total that I wouldn't normally have been able to do, and if I didn't understand and rotate through my shell types. Shells are in actuality a tool. They are a toolbox. You keep that toolbox open during the match and you select a tool that is required for the particular job at hand, as I did on the Centurion in that last shot that we just looked at. Now the toolbox is also different in each tank. So therefore, if you want to do more damage, more big damage in games, I would suggest that you play a tank that you're familiar with and get familiar with and keep returning back to that tank. Again, we see shell selection. If I'd fired an AP round there, I might have got 600 plus damage. Switch up to HE, and then I get a 1200 alpha roll. By the way, that was also an example of deflection shooting, and a deflection shooting is basically firing slightly in front of where you believe, slightly in front of your target, basically guessing where the target will be when the shell arrives. It's explained completely in the TD guide and in the sniping guide, so please have a look at that. Again, you saw shell selection there when I fired at the goose, switching up from AP to HE, getting a big roll and clearing them off. And again, all of these things are contributing to increased damage. Without that, shell rotation and shell selection probably would be maybe 1,000, maybe even more behind my cumulative damage to date in this game. Certainly would have probably gotten only half of the roll on the other WT. Going back to playing tanks that you know, if you want to do more damage, you know, your average damage is going to increase if you play a tank that you're familiar with, if you become expert in a particular tank. It's the same as everything else in life, right? If you are familiar with something, if you are good at it, if you're good at utilizing a particular tool, then you are going to be better with that, right? You know, it's the same when, for example, if you've moved from playing Blitz on your phone to your iPad or vice versa, it takes some time to get used to it again, right? It doesn't mean your skills have changed, your knowledge of the game has changed, but you're using a different tool. And that is what I would suggest is this is something similar, and a similar kind of methodology when you want to increase your damage in Blitz. I'm not saying you have to play the same tank all the time, but if you want to increase your average damage or want to increase your damage in a particular tank, playing that tank, becoming familiar with it, its particular handling, etc., will help you to improve your average damage and help you deliver big damage more regularly in games. We saw in that game there almost 5k of damage, and it's almost twice the next contribution for my teammates, so I think we can safely assume that is big damage. And there's nothing I did in that game that is particularly spectacular. There's nothing I did in that game which you can't do. I think one of the things I have said before about Blitz and about my journey in Blitz is that I was a terrible player when I started, really terrible. I'm not a naturally gifted player. It doesn't naturally come to me as it does, let's say, with his Royal Fatness or with Meadsy or with these other guys who are just superb at playing the game. Of course, they understand the mechanics of the game, but they have a natural ability at it. I didn't. I had to learn everything. I had to do it the hard way. But the good thing about that is that anything I can do, you can do, you know? You might even have more talent at this game than me. So there's nothing in my videos that I do that you can't do or can't learn. And I think that's a point of optimism, right? That you should, you know, there's nothing in my video that anybody watching it cannot do. It's all just about practice and about learning the mechanics of the game. Again, a completely different type of tank here. But what's similar with it is that this has a big gun that does big alpha rolls, right? And again, if you want to increase your average damage, this is a tank which you may want to think about playing. Again, a deflection shot coming up here, and now you see the importance of knowing how to do deflection shooting, right? If you don't know how to do that, if it's not a skill you've perfected and practice at, then you would have missed that shot, and you also would have probably missed a shot on the WT in the previous game, right? Deflection shooting is not a skill, though, which is transferable between tanks. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that the deflection shot that you make in this tank, because of its significantly lower muzzle velocity compared to the WT, needs to be different, right? So you need to aim this tank, aim the shells in this much further ahead of a fast-moving target than you would in the WT, because of significantly lower muzzle velocity, right? Again, we see the importance of switching out to HE. Don't really have too much choice in this tank, by the way. There's only 2 round types, so it makes your shell selection a bit easier. But you know, being conscious of your shell type and switching between them depending on the target is extremely important. Now, as I was saying, you know, deflection shooting is a key skill that you need if you want to do big damage, particularly when you're sniping, because You know, when you're firing from distance, deflection shooting is more difficult, but it's a skill you need even more, because a fast moving target over a long distance is easy to miss. Therefore, being able to deflection shoot is a key skill. And as I said, if you don't know what it is or you're unfamiliar with it, it's explained in much more detail in the sniping guide, which we have in the advanced tutorial playlist, and in the TD guide, which we also have in the advanced tutorial playlist. But you know, just to give you the basics of it, to recap again, it is effectively knowing your tank, knowing your shell's muzzle velocity, and then aiming just slightly in front of where you believe the tank that you're firing at will be when the shell arrives. If you have a slow moving shell, and you're firing at a fast moving tank, then if you fire directly at it, the tank won't be there when the shell arrives, right? So you need to fire slightly ahead. It was a technique developed by World War I pilots, because obviously firing at airplanes with bullets, they needed to fire in front of the plane, and let the plane then effectively fly into the bullets. So it is a skill used obviously by tankers such as Kurt Knipschel, you know, and he very famously made his 3 kilometer shot taken out a T-34, I think in a Panther, although maybe mistaken, maybe it was a Tiger, I'm not sure, I can't remember the details. But you know, this kind of skill is very important should you wish to increase your damage, and of course not miss shots. Again, a good example of, you know, seeing those skills in action. But again, I would emphasize, guys, it's about understanding your tank. It's being familiar with that tank. It's about understanding things like muzzle velocity, shell type, penetration numbers, cycling through your shells, being aware of the shell you have loaded, being aware of the target you're firing at, calculating all those things, keeping your shell selector open, rotating to your shells, and making sure that you make as many shots count as possible, particularly those big alpha roll shots. Again, you know, it's not about only playing TDs or heavy tanks, but generally, and of course this is a general rule of thumb, heavy tanks do more damage than lights and mediums. TDs should be doing more damage than heavy tanks. That's their role in the game. That doesn't mean that you won't get high caliber badges in light tanks and medium tanks. Of course it doesn't. I mean, I once saw Bushka posted a video of a guy who did 10k damage in an Object 140, right? He fired so many shells, actually at the end all he had left was HE, and he couldn't take out, I think it was a Mauser E100 at the end, and he ended up drawing the game even though he did 10k of damage. So, but in general, when we think about the roles of the tanks, and by the way, the role of each tank is explained in the heavy tank guide, the TD guide, the light tank guide, the medium tank guide. In general, the role of a TD is to do damage. The role of a heavy tank is to see strategic parts of a map and to do damage. The role of medium and light tanks is other things: intelligence, it's being the brain, it's moving around the map, gaining you know, things like flanking positions, spotting, scouting, all these different things. So that's sort of the role of the different tanks, right? So in general, if you want to do higher damage consistently, then you really kind of want to use tanks with big guns that do lots of damage, right? This is a good example of such a tank, right? The T95. Now I think in this game it does almost 7k of damage, and you know, I think this is a good example of a tank that, you know, doing its role in the game. You know, it's just a slow moving wall of death, you know, very similar to the Tortoise, a gun that does a massive amount of damage. And you're going to see here, you know, play to its strengths, moving around a small pocket of the map, but doing lots of damage, engaging the enemy, and you know, also bouncing damage too. Another concept to think about in terms of your success in doing big damage is net damage, right? So what's net damage? Well, basically net damage is your damage dealt plus your damage blocked. And why is that important? Well, basically every shot that you block, right, every shot that you deflect or bounce is a shot that could have damaged you, so therefore saves your hit points, but also it's a shot that could have been fired at your allies, so you're also saving them. So you're basically keeping your total hit pool point for your team up. It's what's called in business an opportunity cost, right? If somebody fires a shot at you and it misses, not only are they not damaging you, but they're also missing the opportunity of potentially damaging your allies, right? So it's also about good team play too. So I spoke earlier about a challenge to set yourselves, right? So what I would like you guys to do is, and of course this is, look, if you're a really experienced player watching this, you probably are aware of everything I'm saying, and it's, you know, this video is maybe not gonna make such a difference to you. But if you're learning the game, or perhaps you're not playing too well at the moment, and you just want to set yourself a challenge, what I suggest you do, guys, is pick a tank, or maybe 2 tanks, 3 at most, right? Because we don't want to, go against what we just said about playing tanks that we're familiar with and get used to them, right? That you are not happy with your damage figures on, and see what they are, see what the average damage is. Then look at the table that we had here. By the way, just to interrupt myself for a second, I want to talk to you about shell selection here. I switch up to HE here. Why? Because I know that it is a good chance of damaging the crew, etc., by using HE onto that vulnerable part on the turret of the motion. And actually I got lucky, I did set them on fire. So, and going back to what we were saying about the task, so pick a tank that you're not 100% happy with your damage with. Go to the damage table that we have at the start here. See what is a good benchmark for big damage in that regard, depending on the tier you're at. Watch this video, take some notes, and then research everything about your tank. Know its muzzle velocity, set it up correctly, try to apply the lessons that we've discussed in this game. Play 10 games, check where you are versus your previous damage, also versus the benchmark, and then play another 10 games, check where you are, and after say 30 or 40 games, or maybe 50 games, see if you advance, see if you've increased that average damage on that tank. It's a nice little test. It gives you an objective, something to play toward. I'd be very happy to hear from you either on the Discord channel or in the comments section if it worked. Also, if you found this video useful, if it's helped you, to maybe improve your average damage. And by the way, set yourself modest goals. Increasing by 100, 200, 300, depending on the tier, is also an achievement. Because the good thing about this is, guys, this is not a journey. Sorry, this is not a destination, it's a journey, right? I don't expect people to watch this, go out and start doing 5k average damage every game. No, because, Blitz is a game where you progress gradually, right? That's where you go through the tiers, you acquire skills gradually, of course, unless you are a phenomenal to the game, like as Wild Fatness or like Meadsy or these people. But most of us mortals have to progress through the game gradually. So set yourself modest targets and see if you actually make some progress. And if not, maybe you can feel free to contact me. We can discuss it on Discord or whatever, and maybe we can think about what perhaps is going wrong. Things you should be looking for, by the way, are Confederate badges, sharpshooter, master gunner, etc. They're the things that show that you are really right on the right road. So let's have a recap of the key points of this video, right? So firstly, know your tank, know its role, it's key. And heavy and TDs tend to do more damage on the average than other types of tanks. Make sure you're set up correctly, and make sure that you're familiar with the tank, because the setup will differ in particular tanks, right? Preparation checklist. So look at the preparation advanced tutorial and make sure that you understand that, because it's all about game planning. The SAS famously say that if you train hard, you fight easy. If you train easy, you fight hard. So basically it's about preparation, knowing your tank, knowing its strengths, getting key skills and understanding them, like deflection shooting, like tracking shots, all of these different things, and then test yourself, right? So do this benchmark exercise we just described. Pick a few tanks where you're not happy with your average damage, and then set yourself that benchmark and see if you progress over 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 battles. There's a lot of knowledge, a lot of skills you need, but as I said, it's a journey, it's not a destination. We're going to continue on it together. Hopefully I can help you, and hopefully by interacting together here on the channel or on Discord, we can help each other, and you can improve that average damage and do that big damage that you want to do. So there's links to all of the advanced tutorials I mentioned in this video in the description. I hope you'll watch them and find it useful. Remember what the SAS said: train easy, fight hard. Train hard, fight easy. Thanks for watching, guys. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found it enjoyable. Cheers, Mush, and I guess all that remains for me to say is pants off.